Hello and welcome to Deserve 2020, a better tomorrow today. Today's session is entitled HIV and the Family, Building a Community. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of Guin Davis today, and they are going to answer, and we're going to chat and such and have a good time. Guin, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Guin Davis. My full name is Guins Davis, and my pronouns are they, them. I am non-binary, and I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia. Shout out to my people. I currently reside in the suburbs of Maryland. I am a philosophy professor. I have been doing a lot of HIV advocacy work for the past maybe like 5 or 6 years. And I currently am actually working as the co-chair of the University of Maryland's Prevention Research Center for LGBTQ plus mental health and wellness. So
Nice. So you sound busy. Aren't you also a model?
Yes, I haven't modeled in a while, and the way COVID is set up, that's not really. I don't even think that's something.
And I feel like you have multiple social media profiles. One of them focuses on cosplay.
Yes, yes. One of my cosplay pages. I have a couple now because I'm also doing some extracurricular podcasting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Listen, I've been on a couple, and someone's trying to get me to co-host another, which I kind of pre-approved. So I'm already in that. But one of my cosplay pages is the Black McCoy. The other page that for our podcast is the Blurred Spectrum, where we get a chance to talk about like a variety of different things. Like we've covered the election, we covered Chadwick Boseman's passing, movies, cartoons, anime, all that good stuff. We covered all of that. Yeah. Aside from that, I think, no, that's it. Yeah, I do a lot of the social media for that as well.
I feel like I'm trying to figure out how I missed that. Yeah, I'm excited.
I don't think I brought it up that much.
I generally still pay attention. I don't know how I missed that. But anywho, we're excited to have you. Thank you for saying yes, because your schedule is serious. And I'm aware of that.
I always say yes for you. Always. You're one of my most beloved people in my life.
I appreciate you. By the way, if you guys haven't already enjoyed a couple of those yoga sessions, because he's also a yogi. When I tell you the guys, they're busy. They're just busy. I don't understand. How are you doing it? How do you have time?
The funny thing about having time is making sure I have time to do absolutely nothing. Yes, always making time, always finding time to have absolutely nothing to do. And those are some of my most valuable periods of time. And so like, for instance, someone last week, it was like a small gathering, but I was already kind of burnt out because I've been working on some syllabi for next semester. And I've been running around doing a lot of errands, and I was just like, yeah, they're like, yeah, what are you up to? I'm like, nothing. Oh, do you want to know? I genuinely meant nothing. I'm not doing anything. That's for me. That's how it's specific.
You and my youngest sister have made it clear to me that I need to make sure that I too take that and make that a part of my to-do list.
Yes.
That is a notch on there. Do nothing. That's nothing.
It doesn't matter what your nothing looks like. It can look like some binging. It can look like snacking. Just make sure you do some nothing. Take you a nap. I think naps are evil. That's unpopular opinion.
I will never agree with you on that because I love a nap.
I have personally never had a good nap.
Your naps are probably too long. We're digressing. So I hope you guys have enjoyed Guin's yoga sessions. I'm sure you have. If you haven't, they are still going to continue to be up. So you want to catch those while they're available. But we're going to dive right into these questions, okay? So I've been asking everybody these questions throughout the week. One of them, we're going to just start with the first one. It says, when did you know this work was for you? For you, what is that work? Go ahead and break that down as well.
It's interesting. So I think when we talk a lot about HIV work, a lot of people have a tendency to just call it the work,
Right.
which is very vague and very expansive and specific at the same time. But I knew it was for me when when I moved up here. I just kind of stumbled into it. I started doing a lot of, sexual health and reproductive justice work as an intern with one of the organizations I was with, the Advocates for Youth, when I moved up here initially. And I kind of got my feet wet there, and it just kind of spiraled out of control since then. Like, I was in grad school at the time, but then I found myself, and I always had this kind of, even this philosophical obsession with like sex and sexuality and gender and the kind of larger social relationships that happen there, and actually finding myself deeper in a field where all of that's that much more important and somehow unimportant at the same time. I guess we'll talk about that later. But I like working with youth and getting them into just sexual health work and reproductive justice was interestingly enough, how I got here. Helping the younger generation find their advocacy through this avenue of work is how I got into the work. And from there, I went on from there to work with the Department of Health. I interned with Guin for a little while in their policy office. And I just kind of found myself landing in nonprofit and specifically HIV organizations, and just finding myself doing more outreach and learning what outreach was, and even helping formulate what outreach needs to be and help influence the conversations as to how do you do outreach effectively, what is the mindset you need to have when you're doing outreach, why are we here, and where is it that we want to go with outreach, and what are the limitations of the traditional model of outreach, and how can we refine that model even more to make sure that we reach as many people as possible where they are, however they need to be reached. And then I moved further to direct service and was doing some case management for a little while. And then I found my way to University of Maryland for their PRC. Yeah.
We're going to take a brief break. I'm going to pause this and we'll be right back.
Welcome to Deserve 2020, a better tomorrow today. If you haven't already registered, go ahead and do so. You can log on to gallenbattle.org and click on the Deserve 2020 tab. Remember, click on that Deserve 2020 tab at the top of the screen, and you can go ahead and register right there. It's absolutely free. If you'd like to leave a donation, we've got a spot for that. If you'd like to become a sponsor, we have a spot for that too. Tell your friends.
So we're back. Thank you, Guin, for walking us through that journey and through that process.
Yeah, of course.
You making it into this work. I guess there really is no answer for when you knew. You knew because you kept finding yourself in it.
It was serendipitous, to say the least.
Why are you so passionate about this?
I'm passionate about it because it wasn't until later in my life that I learned more about people living with HIV, and I learned more about my community. Actually, it more so came from being connected to my community. I didn't have the bandwidth and the space, the physical space, and the mental and emotional space that I needed to really branch out into like my own queerness and what it meant to be a part of a queer community and so on and so forth until I moved up here. Like, I didn't have that. I wasn't as on my own back in Georgia because, my family's there and so on and so forth. And not that they wouldn't love me one way or another, but I'm of a firm mind that if there are spaces or places that you've been that maintain a lot of memories or a lot of feelings and this, that, and the other, then it can be very stifling. A lot of that energy gets held in those spaces. And so it was it was more liberating for me to kind of venture out on my own, even though, no, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely cried like my first night up here by myself, because I was like, oh my God. I finally like moved out of the nest. Like, I moved out of the area, I moved out of the state, like I'm 600 miles away from home and I'm by myself. So that was a large moment for me, but being able, like I said, being able to really connect with community was that turning point for me, because I was learning more about how like Black queer people specifically are so disproportionately affected by a number of things, not even just HIV, but like homelessness and mental health and socioeconomically. Like there's so much that affects us, and to be privy to so much of that at one time is kind of overloading. But at the same time, if taken in, not correctly, but taken in with like the largest breath, it's easy to exhale this kind of mandate to, I need to help do something about this. I need to be a part of whatever solution I can figure out. And then the interesting part about that is that hard lesson that I learned about my personal form of advocacy is that advocacy looks different for everybody. It's for some people, it's going to be, you know, getting out there in the streets, making signs, marching, shouting, raging against the machine, quite literally. And for others, it might be writing. For others, it might be, you know, just kind of speaking. For some people, it might just be, you know, those few Facebook comments where you check your friends every now and again. Like it might be that. It might be just learning everything that you can and making sure other people have access to that information. It's like, it's one of those things that I learned. There's no one way to do it. There's a lot of different fronts. And I'm of the strong opinion that a fight can never be fought in one way. It has to be fought on an array of different fronts in order to be effective. And so me personally, I like to write and I like to speak. I like to do things like this. This is part of that. It taps into those professor nerds where I get to talk a little bit more and, you know, embellish upon like my own thoughts and opinions and views and connect them to the necessities of the community. And yes, sorry. My mind started to wander. But to tie that back, it's just being able to figure out what advocacy looks like for me and how I can best utilize myself, my skill set, and my relationship to others in order to help others was the key there for me. Community. The interesting part about that question is when I continue to think about it, it's not so much that the HIV isn't necessarily like the problem itself to solve with the community. It's the community that needs the mending, rather than the ailment itself. Because like a lot of people say, like we are not a community of people who are HIV positive. We are a community of people. People are, even if someone, regardless of whether someone's HIV positive, whether they have, you know, diabetes or whether they have, like, they are not their illness. No one is ever their illness, but they are still a whole person. And being able to really tap into that is something that I found useful. Being able to really understand that ultimately you can treat HIV with medication. That's fine. That's you know, it's a chronic illness, but you can't beat stigma with, you know, medication. You can't beat like people being discriminated against just because of ignorance. You can't beat those things with medication. And so there are other ways to do that. And even people who don't live with HIV, like they still have to deal with, it's an interesting dynamic because not only do they have to deal with the stigma of being Black and being queer, or whether you fall on both of those points or not, on top of being, unfortunately, sometimes being vessels for that same stigma, as well as being kind of ignorant to what any solutions might really look like. It's a weird space to have to be in, wherever you fall in this kind of like intersectional playing field of what it means to be Black, queer, HIV negative, HIV positive. And it's interesting because it's a status neutral conversation that a lot of Black people have a stake in. And we haven't, in my personal opinion, moved entirely towards a status neutral approach, because ending the epidemic is like one of those things that we invest a lot of time, effort, emotion, passion into. But the epidemic, at least from my perspective, isn't always going to be the illness itself. It's going to be how we relate to it.
Wow, that was so perfectly said. So perfectly said. And with that, I'm going to skip down in the questions. I know you're looking at them in order. I want to skip down. I want to ask you very specifically, as an advocate, why do you believe that visibility is so important? I just want these two really tie together.
Visibility is important because, actually, I'm going to tie this to the most fundamental part of advocacy, and that's outreach. Visibility is important because when you think of, well, I'll try to keep my I statements. When I think about the way the kind of nonprofit industrial complex is set up, there are so many people who are left at the bottom. And we get to see those people when we do outreach. We get to see those people when, you know, you're a case manager, or when even if you're like the front desk secretary of like the administrative assistant of a nonprofit, you get to see those faces. And especially if you're an outreach worker and you're out in the field, you literally get to see those lives out there. I've had many outreach like work events where it might have been late, and, you know, we're at the 7-Eleven. There's still 7-Elevens up here. I learned that. So I thought they were gone because I haven't seen one in Georgia in a minute. But like, we could be out in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, and there'll be someone who they might be a pimp, they might not be. I don't ask those kinds of questions because personally, that's not really my business. My business is to make sure that you have these condoms, make sure you get tested, make sure X, Y, and Z, right? And you get to kind of see not just those kinds of dynamics, but you get to see the way communities are structured outside of how grants think communities are structured, or how they think that work is actually structured. And it's hard because when you're out there in the field, it's like you see everything and you want to do something about every bit of it, but it's hard to get all of that back up to the top. And it's hard to quote one of my favorite mentors, Angel Brown, it's hard to, well, she used the term manage up. That's the part I'm quoting. From my perspective, it's difficult to manage up and let people in positions of power know what actually needs to happen, especially if they're not down there in real time seeing what needs to happen. And it's like you get the imperative, you get the importance of what they want, but it's almost like a savior complex thing. You understand that there are needs, and you understand what needs to be done, but you can't do what needs to be done in the way that you think it needs to be done, or the way that you quote unquote know it needs to be done. You need to do things in the way that communities can respond to them, or you need to do things in ways that are community, help the community wants, what's best for them. And it's a very, I don't think it's a gentle approach. I think it's a more intentional approach, because there's a difference between being a savior and, you know, being an advocate.
You are obviously a professor. So thorough. And I'm expecting you to answer and to give the details and to give the answers one way. And you do that, but then you remind me, you lift up the veil just a little bit so that we could get so much more information. And I'm appreciating this. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's late in the evening.
It's fine.
I don't know when you got.
Thank you for letting me talk.
Right. I know that everyone may not watch this at any given time, you know, at the same time. But I do want to point out that Guin has set aside their time to film this at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. I want to make sure that it's clear, because this vibrance that they're giving, this energy that they're giving, the thorough nature, these are the type of people that we're so grateful for when we think about the people who are connected with deserve. So thank you so much. I want to ask you this. How can public health professionals better serve the bisexual, non-binary, and transgender communities as it relates to HIV prevention and care? I know that you're not a member of all of those communities.
It's interesting. Okay, so I think this is like one of the more radical things about me, right? I am strong. Strong is a strong word. I am relatively adamant about the notion of separatism. For a very long time, a lot of things have been subject to this kind of hegemonic way of a hegemonic approach. Like HIV work has been hegemonic insofar as it's really been targeted towards a lot of Black cis men or Black trans women. Like it's very, there are very obvious nodal points that even the community notices and is not appreciative of. I will say, for starters, being extremely adamant about altering the language surrounding the advocacy itself. I don't think MSM is a sufficient term when you're trying to address communities because it erases so much. And it ties back to that question about visibility, like you want to know who you are actually having a conversation with. It's interesting. So when I was in grad school and I started doing a lot of this work, I noticed, I had this shocking realization because I'm also, just full disclosure, I'm bisexual. And I was thinking, you know what, let me look up, bisexual kind of, statistics and stuff. So we have the information and the data and the research for lesbian communities and gay men and MSMs. Let me see if there's specifically some that just are for people who are bisexual. Stunning lack of results. It was so hard to find next to anything that was strictly just bisexual, whether it was bisexual women, bisexual men, bisexual trans people, like it was such a difficult project that I almost was, I was angry. Like it didn't make any sense to me, especially from someone who used to be a biology major who studied, science briefly in undergrad and having insight into what it means to have, data sets and to do research in X, Y, and Z, and know that if there hasn't been, at least from the perspective of reading the literature that had come across me at that time, that there was no real effort to give people who are bisexual their own lanes so we can understand what the problem looks like in each of those lanes.
Yeah.
And it still to this day doesn't make sense to me. And it wasn't until I will say that the most research that I find on bisexuals is they're usually like more in-depth pieces that are more psychological or sociological or philosophical, which I love. I love those things, obviously, but they aren't always sufficient to be transparent. They aren't always sufficient for funders, or they aren't always sufficient for organizations to change the way in which they operate in order to cater to that part of the community. And a lot of the same happens with non-binary folks and trans folks as well, because there's an image that a lot of people have that has kind of stigmatized that existence, and not even, stigmatized in the way that, HIV might be stigmatized or HIV stigmatizes them as a community, but it's like, I'm trying to word this in the way that I need to. It's as though doing this kind of work and using the populations that we have in order to reach the destination, the overall destination that we're trying to get to, stigmatizes them to the point where they become these objects of this really intense gaze from an industry that means well, but at the same time treats the people that they're trying to help like dollars and like pawns to an extent. And like I said before, they notice. We notice. Like everyone knows. It's not a secret. Like it's so much so to the point where a lot. Well, I'll say a colleague of mine who I love very much. She was saying. I remember she and I were having a conversation the other day, and she was telling me, trans woman. She was telling me that one of the reasons she left working in public health was because it was very noticeable how public health had become extremely saturated with cis Black gay men, or just cis gay men in general. And I couldn't disagree with her at all. And it has shown how the work that the goal that this work has set out to do has taken the community that it was trying to serve, or is still serving. I'm not going to say it's not doing anything whatsoever. That'd be disingenuous of me. The community that it's out to serve, and not only, I don't want to make it sound as insidious as like experimented on them, but but like has worked with them for decades to cure them, to save them, and at the same time recruited them as kind of soldiers in this kind of battle that we've been waging against HIV and for safer sex practices and things of that nature. And then moving from this kind of we're at war, we're trying to save lives, to okay, well, we've gotten to a point in history where now it's become less of a war that we're waging and more of an industry that has been built and that people can thrive on and people can take advantage of to certain extents. And that has left too much room, in my personal opinion, for people to find their way into positions of power that don't necessarily need to be there. Not that they aren't particularly qualified, but they may not have the necessary mentality or perspective in order to get the work done. It's like, yeah, you may have an MPH, but I actually, I will say this. I know people who have MPH, who have MPHs and PhDs, who are far less qualified to do the work that they're trying to do, than someone who never even went to college, but has been doing this work since they were a teenager and is now almost in their 40s and 50s, and has just been working in the community, working with these, funders, working and talking to people in different positions of power, because that's just how long they've been doing this. And people know who they are based on the fact that they have been in it since antiquity. Like, they've been there since the beginning. They've done more to contribute to the community's needs rather than I always say the funders' needs, because I'm of the opinion that funders have a very, very, very strict way of kind of keeping organizations under control. I'm not saying organizations are completely innocent either. I know there are organizations that do amazing work, organizations that do mediocre work but are trying. And there are organizations who do mediocre work and are trying and could do more. And it's such a weird sea of things to have to deal with, because a lot of what used to be fighting for the community and fighting for, what I fundamentally find to be access to something better, something greater, something necessary, something that people deserve, has become a career. And that's not always the best thing. I mean, it's great to have jobs, but it's one of those things where, like, well, at what cost? Because it's different if you are starting a business to, I don't know, make pizzas, I'm being random, to like make pizzas for your, and, make sure your community has access to something that's local, something that's inexpensive, something that's quality, versus something that literally affects people's lives every single day. Mm-hmm. And taking advantage of that system in the process. So to kind of tie that back to what the initial question was, making sure that we have language that separates communities, and not just separates but prioritizes. That's the other key thing, because we can talk about what it means to be communally specific when we are addressing excuse me, addressing folks' needs. But if you don't actually prioritize them in a way that they need, then you're not, I don't think that you're doing everything that you possibly can to make those things come together in a really healthy, cohesive, and productive way. Like I can't be in a position to help trans women and trans men achieve everything that they need to have access to in order to be healthy, happy, and whole if, you know, I have never worked around trans folks ever in my life, and all I've done is study trans issues, or sit back and listen to other people talk about trans issues. I've never interacted with trans people before. And I say those things in some degrees of extreme, but that's the reality that a lot of these organizations and folks who are in positions of power have to deal with. Like, they don't have the connection to the trans community. The trans community being a very specific example right now, but having, and even that, and I'll modify that, even having the access that they do, it might be dated. Things also need to be updated. You can't continue to talk about issues and people in ways that don't take them into account. I don't know how to put it any simpler than that.
That phrase really summed it all up. And that's perfect. That's perfect. We can't assume that we're going to be able to serve a group of people if they're not a part of the conversation, if we haven't taken their opinions and their thoughts and their feelings and what they're going through currently into account, and if we haven't really taken the time to get to know them presently.
Right.
Not our past experiences decades ago, but what's going on.
The queer issues of 1980 and 1990 and 2000 are completely different from the ones of the 2010s and 2020 and moving forward. Like we're dealing with different sets of problems. We're dealing with different circumstances. COVID is a perfect example of that.
Perfect example. Well, Guin, I thank you so much for being so willing this late in the evening to answer these questions and to join with us. I am so grateful. I just want to end with one final question. I know we had a list, but I think giving us has been amazing, and I just want to end with this one, and it's going to tie us back into the theme of our conference. So whenever you see deserve or I deserve,
you're muted.
There is an acronym or an abbreviation of the word deserve, and it's broken down to IDSRV. And you know, so now that stands for I dream, speak, and receive victory. When you hear that phrase, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? 60 seconds.
I think of light. I think of light. Like the immediate vision was like the sky, and not even like a sunset, but like, you know, when you're flying and you see the sun through the clouds, that's what I see. That's what I think of. Nothing's necessarily coming from that light. It's just that it's there and you can see it. And it's very kind of like Platonic, Socratic way. It's like one is always reaching for the light. One is always trying to be like the light, or draw knowledge from it, or be a part of it somehow. It is the thing that we look towards in order to better understand the world and better understand ourselves. And it is something that shines light onto the truth of things. And something that is almost unreachable, but never truly so, because it's so vast that we don't have a full conception of how much of it there is, how far away it is, but we know that we can always feel it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Number one, thank you for joining us here, but also thank you for the work that you're doing in working and building and bridging the gap between communities. We really appreciate you. If no one else tells you thank you today or this week or this month or the rest of this year, I'm telling you thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And I mean that. I know it sounds cheesy, but I mean
it. For
mean
putting all of this together, I know you have been doing a lot of this work, and I know all of the things it's been putting you through.
We won't talk about it.
And you still find that smile right on your face, deep in your heart. You always pull it out.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's real. I appreciate you. We're going to close this session out, but have a wonderful evening.
Thank you
so much. Get you some rest. I'm going to do the same.
I will hold you to it.
And that concludes this session. Thank you.